Yeah, Stan, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. I got you this time.
Woo, good. Sorry, that comes from confusion. We're still figuring out the ins and outs of some of this tech stuff. They should get a better tech guy.
Oh, yeah, I think you guys are doing great.
Well, welcome, Stan. It's great to have you on here. I know you can't see us, but we've got Ron Murphy, and then we've got Colin Schneider, and then my wife Gina, who you haven't met yet. So we're all on here.
Great. It's glad to
Hi.
talk to everybody this evening.
Great. We're pretty excited to have you, Stan, because we all know you from all the past conferences and stuff. So it's for us, it's really exciting to have you on here. And we're going on the aspect that a lot of people that listen to various podcasts and conferences stuff know who you are. But for those that don't, just give a brief background of what you do, who you are.
Well, I started this a long time ago when I was 10 years old, back in 1959, as a curious kid interested in science, electronics. And I happened to hear a radio show one night talking about people who claim to have seen strange things, flying saucers, haunted houses. And I went to the library and started reading all kind of books on the subject to see if it was true or not. That's how I got involved. So I've been out in the field since 1965 investigating UFOs, Bigfoot, cryptids, and other phenomena. And all these years, so it's 62 years of research this year, I've never personally seen a UFO or Bigfoot myself. In 1969, I set up a hotline for the public to report UFO sightings. Well, that ended up being a hotline for all kind of phenomena because people are calling in about all kind of unusual things they were seeing. And even today, my phone rings off the hook. I've been on the phone for hours today interviewing witnesses. And of course, I have my website, stangordon.info. 1970, I founded the first of three volunteer research group that investigated sightings across Pennsylvania. And the group was kind of unique in that most people involved were specialists, from scientists, engineers, police officers, former military personnel. We had a lot of specialists involved. We investigated sightings around the clock for years and years and years. And so I've been doing this for a long, long time, and the phenomena, whatever we're dealing with, is still ongoing. It's very active even this year. And we're hearing UFO sightings, Thunderbird reports, Bigfoot sightings. The last few years have been very, very busy.
That's pretty darn cool, because you would think after so long, maybe people would run out of sightings.
Well, whatever the phenomenon is, it's something that goes on every year, all year round. And something I realized from the time I began to go out in the field, especially with UFO sightings, that while many credible people report sightings, and a lot of the things seem initially unusual, when you take time to properly investigate them, many are determined to be misidentifications of natural or man-made objects. But every year we're getting reports of various phenomena, UFOs and Bigfoot and cryptids and other phenomena that occurs that you could not dismiss and put under the rug. There's something going on, and a lot of people are seeing these things for the first time, and a lot of them are very, very confused over what they saw, and they're looking for answers.
Yeah, what's interesting, though, I have to tell you, Stan, is that it seems year after year, we're still getting particular hotspots in Western Pennsylvania, aren't we? It seems like South Greensburg continually is going to have these Thunderbird sightings. What is up with South Greensburg?
Well, that's something we don't know. It's 119, Route 119, that a lot of it's been around South Greensburg. And, of course, that recent sighting was a couple of them. One was actually in downtown Greensburg, but it moved towards South Greensburg. The other one was the northern part of town. But I've had other people contact me, have said they've seen things down there also in recent years. And I've talked to numerous people who have seen these things from, probably going out from Mount Pleasant and the whole way in towards South Greensburg. We've had reports for years, for whatever reason, right along that stretch. But we've had many reports in other areas of Pennsylvania as well, including up on the Chestnut Ridge. And so there's a lot of phenomena. And yes, there are hot spots. And, I started writing about those back in the 70s when all that massive UFO Bigfoot wave was going on here in 1973 and the 74 in Pennsylvania, when a lot of very, very bizarre things showed up with UFOs and Bigfoot seen together, and a lot of other phenomena was going on. But back then when I started writing about it, I didn't realize how strange it was, and those reports have continued more and more, and especially in the last recent years. And you have some of these locations where the phenomena, whatever we're dealing with, seems to focus on, seems to target a certain geographical location or a property. And this phenomena can go on for hours, days, weeks, months, or years. And it's very similar to what you heard about on the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. But a lot of this was going on years before. And there have been other locations like this in Pennsylvania years ago that we were looking into. But even currently, I mean, there's two places right now that I keep my eyes on that are happening where these are ongoing cases, ongoing incidents, especially one up in the Pennsylvania-New York border where there's been a lot of very interesting, strange activity. And they've got some very, very good video of some of these strange balls of light that I've been talking about for years. I called them mini UFOs when I started investigating them back in the 60s.
Now, one thing I will say, Stan, that probably makes you one of the more respected researchers around, that you're not jumping to conclusions. You're not saying, well, I think this was what it is. I think this, you're just saying, look, somebody reported a Bigfoot. Somebody said this is what they saw, and you talk to them and get the reports, but you don't really judge what you're hearing. You just take the info and compile it all.
That's what you have to do, because the phenomena is so strange. I said years ago, the phenomena is so strange it protects itself. The more I know about it, the stranger it is. Every time you think you have a pattern or something else turns up and makes you wonder what you're dealing with. And I've got some ideas. I've learned a lot more. There's so many different aspects of the Bigfoot phenomena that I've come across over the years, which, as strange as it sounds, and I'm not the only one that's finding this out now, many people around the country are reporting the same thing, especially in recent years, that we're dealing with something that is just much stranger than just a normal unknown flesh and blood animal. There's certain aspects of these phenomena that are very unusual. There's a physical and a non-physical element to it. And for a lack of a better term, it might be interdimensional. But I sure don't have the answers of what's going on. I think the government's had an interest in this for years and years, not only UFOs, but I seem to see an indication they've interested in Bigfoot as well. But I don't think they have the answers either.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
I am. Okay.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
Before we we were going to talk about one of the more interesting cases in a little detail. When people have something they want to report, what would you tell them that they should be looking for? What questions you're going to ask, any information or anything like that, so it gets the best report possible?
Well, of course, the reports, including people I talked to today, in cases that happened. I'm looking at something that occurred last night. We're getting reports on now, and these are people that are calling in because they like to know, one, has anybody else reported this? For lots of people, it's a first-time experience. And in other cases, some people seem to have a history of having different types of encounters. Each case is different. But I always want to, you want to be very careful not to lead the witness. You don't want to put words in their mouth. You want them to tell you the story and the details. So I write down all the minor details and all the different aspects of what they're telling me and what they saw, what it looked like, what this thing did, whatever it might be. And it's amazing because sometimes you've got other people in the same area reporting the same thing, or there's been a history of phenomena going on in those areas as well. But of course, we'd like people, especially today with all the technology, we sure hope that people can get some type of audio, video recordings of what they're seeing, or at least photographs. And we're getting more and more of these. I mean, in the last couple of years, I'm getting numerous pictures and videos in. We had a really interesting wave of UFO activity this past February and March throughout Western PA, and a lot of it right in the greater Pittsburgh area in populated areas. And there was a lot of even daylight UFO sightings, and not just lights, but we're talking large objects low in the sky. And then we had many reports of these small spheres of light low to the ground around people's properties. Just really, really interesting reports coming in. And even in last couple of weeks, things are going on. So, yeah, it's been very busy around here. But we're hopeful that witnesses will document the information. They'll get more than one witness if possible. They'll look for any kind of physical evidence. They'll let us know if there is any evidence out there. Hopefully they'll get at least some type of recording, visual or audio. And any bit of data like this helps so you can compare it with other reports.
Yeah, that's what I like about you, Stan. And I'll tell you, I've been interested in your research. I mean, you're the reason why I'm sitting here today. You take an unbiased approach. I have been in this field now for a while and dealing with other investigators, and I do know that certain types of investigators have a bias, whether it's the flesh and blood camp or the extraterrestrial camp or what have you. But whenever they take reports, if something doesn't particular their particular schematic, they'll throw that report out or not include those instances that they think is, the red herring. And I think what's so interesting about you, Stan, and why we really need to admire you as somebody in this field is that you don't look at this from a personal aspect. You take everything that's included. And what is so fascinating is all these little minutiae that you've included over the years are starting to kind of connect the dots, aren't they? Bigfoot seen with, strange lights in the area, or the sounds that they make is sometimes people report them sounding like babies. This is something that's been reported now since when, the 1960s, 1970s, and it's still with us to this day.
Yeah, and again, I'm so surprised because so much what I documented and wrote about back in the early 70s, well, now it's going on all over the country.
Right.
And exactly, back in those days, I was in touch with a lot of the well-known names in the Bigfoot field from not only the United States but other countries, and there were many researchers out there that were receiving these really high strangeness type of reports and details, even back then. But they told me, they said, we're not going to write about it. They're going to think I'm crazy.
Right.
They don't want to have repercussions from the other people in the field or, other, and that was the situation. And but now more and more, these reports are coming out. The internet's full of reports. There's been several great books written in the last few years on these topics, and people are talking about it much more, and they're not laughing like they used to. And one of the reasons is because a lot of people in the Bigfoot field are now reporting seeing these odd luminous anomalies, these small spheres of light that are low to the ground. Sometimes they even approach them in the woods. It's happened already even this year. And so this is something I think that you're going to be hearing a lot more about in the years to come.
All right, before we talk about the case or cases, Gina, Colin, do you guys have anything for Stan before we get into a big discussion?
No, I'm good. I think I'm mostly just waiting to talk about the case.
Okay. Gina.
Just this is my take, my question. just a little one. I'm familiar a little bit with Stan because some of the videos that we watched on I think it was Amazon Prime, right?
Yeah. Seth Breed loves Chestnut Ridge.
Yes. Is Stan, is your family involved? Is it just you, or do you have family members that are involved with what you do?
I have a lot of great support, but my family's all grown and they have their own families and they're out of here. I've got 3 very, very young little grandsons that are really showing interest in some of these things, and they love the cryptids and Bigfoot stuff, most of them. And you never know, someday maybe they'll follow along my path. But my wife's very supportive. She puts up with the phones ringing all hours of the day and night, but I'm the main one. And, of course, I haven't had my groups for a long time, but I still maintain contact with many other researchers and research groups in other areas. So if I can't get out, somebody else can follow up on some of the reports.
And I think that's great, too, because at your website, I'll put a link to it. You have a whole lot of research, a whole lot of reports for people to go read. And again, it's not biased. Well, here's what I think and blah, 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 like Ron said. This is what the witness told me. Here's a picture they drew, and just this is all they said. Nothing left out, nothing added, no decisions or anything.
And that's the whole point, because we don't have the answers. And I don't think anybody has the answers. And I said years ago, especially dealing with the UFO phenomena, that I think it's very likely that once you dismiss all the cases you can identify, which is a lot, there's that body of data which suggests that we may be dealing with more than one origin to the unknown UFO category. So who knows? Maybe a small percentage, maybe they're ETs, extraterrestrial spacecraft. I mean, I've interviewed multitudes, literally thousands of witnesses over the years, including many, many that had very detailed, very close-range sightings. And if you read that report I just put out a couple of days ago, which is getting a lot of coverage, surprisingly, I detailed some of the case I investigated going back in the 60s and 70s and 80s up to the present time. And these are cases that you could not easily dismiss. And these things are going on. And, of course, everybody's awaiting the government report. I don't expect there's going to be any major revelations or any type of disclosure, but I think the door will open a little more and more. There'll be a little more information coming out. But for them to come out and say, yeah, there's something here, and it's not from our planet or not from this dimension or whatever, I don't think that's going to happen for quite a while.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the report when it comes out too. So that's kind of our thoughts. So Stan, the case we were going to talk about, give us what it is, what the report was about. So we've got a little bit of thing, and if anybody has any questions, or anything to discuss. Stan, just for your information, we approach all of this as 4 different viewpoints. We've got Ron as the investigator, and Colin's the skeptic and researcher. Gina's the experiencer, and I'm kind of the tech guy. So we may have some questions based on our input to what we're doing with the group. So that's how we try and approach things a little differently. So please, if you could, tell everybody about this case that we're going to talk about.
Well, I think the one in particular you're interested in was the case of all cases, I would say, there was the one that really changed my perspective on what we were dealing with. And this goes back to that massive UFO wave of 1973 and the 1974, when first we had literally hundreds of UFO reports coming in all year across Pennsylvania. And many of these were not lights in the sky. These were large, low-level objects, sometimes low over highways, pacing cars. We had landing reports, sometimes with physical traces. And back then, the news media was covering a lot of these stories, both locally and across the state. And that was the time, of course, there was no cell phones and no internet. And it was just amazing reports were coming in. And first, it was all UFO reports all year. Then in the summer of 73, we had the largest outbreak of Bigfoot sightings ever documented, which went on for months and months. Many of those Bigfoot sightings were in daylight. Many of them were at extremely close range. When I'm talking about close range, we're talking within feet of witnesses. In many cases, my teams, which again, there was a lot of scientific people involved, scientists and engineers and research people of all kinds, and we were doing this around our regular jobs, responding 24 hours a day to many of these cases. So we're on the scene soon after it happened, so we could document these cases very quickly. And as all these things are going on, some odd things began to come to our attention. And one of the first things was that we'll get out to some of these locations, and there'd be trails of large, unusual footprints with a large stride between them, different type of ground conditions, even snow, that you would follow, and then suddenly these tracks would suddenly stop abruptly. There was no more tracks. There was no possible way that could have been fabricated. And that kind of report is still going on even in recent years. And then we had other people telling us that, for example, they'd be looking at a Bigfoot, and suddenly in daylight, they see this thing physically vanish, and seconds later reappear at another position very close to them. And it wasn't just one report. We were getting this from different locations. And then we began to see this odd pattern. We'd have a UFO sighting in a particular area. Within minutes to hours or days later, we'd have a Bigfoot sighting or vice versa. And then things began to get very, very even more intriguing. Then we began to have cases with UFOs and Bigfoot seen together at the same time and place. And one of the first cases that really drew our attention was in September 73, north of Pittsburgh, where 2 witnesses watched this tall, hair-covered, it was a white, hairy Bigfoot, which you don't hear about very often. We do get those reports. It's running across the road towards the wooded area, but in one of its hands, it had a glowing ball of light. And as it continues to run, a short time later, this unusual object comes across the sky and projects a beam of light down on the woods where the creature ran into. Well, these reports are beginning to come in from much further areas of the state, from people who have no way of knowing about the other reports. Many of the reports initially coming in the police departments, and then they were referring them over to us to follow up on. And it was the case you want to talk about was the night of October 25th, 1973. It's a case I'll never forget because it was a life-change experience for me and my team, I can tell you. And it made us realize that we're dealing with things here that nobody could ever imagine. And I'll tell you, if I hadn't been involved in some of these cases, it'd be very hard for me to believe. But I have no doubt the case occurred. So I got a call from a state trooper from the Uniontown Barracks up in Fayette County. It's about 10:30 that night, and he said he had just come back from investigating this very strange incident. He thought that there may well be something still up in the field on the farm, and he wanted me to send up one of my teams as soon as possible. Well, it's already late at night, but we gathered our equipment. We got our radiation gear. We got our recording equipment. We took all our stuff and got it loaded up, and we found our way up to rural Fayette County. And we were there during the early morning hours and met with a key witness and some others. And what we found out was about 9 o'clock that evening, about 15 people. So you didn't have just one witness. You had multiple witnesses. They see this huge spherical red object about as big as a barn, about 100 feet off the ground. It's hovering and slowly moving down. And as they watch, it looks like this thing is going to land in on this farm pasture. Well, the story kind of evolves around the farmer's son. His dad owned the property. He's coming out to visit, and as he's riding down the road, he sees people standing outside and they're looking at this object in the sky, and he sees it. So he decides to go up at a better location, get a better look at this thing, and it looks like it's going to land. So there were two neighbor boys, younger boys. So those three fellows decide they're going to go up and see what this thing is. Before they head up that way, they decide that they're going to stop over at the farm, and he did, and he grabbed a 30-06, so it's a high-powered weapon with a handful of ammunition, and he didn't realize it till later that in that ammunition were two tracers. So the hunters out there, you just get that luminous trail that kind of shows you the trajectory when you fire that, and anyhow, he had that. As they're moving down the farm lane towards the area where this thing looked like it was coming down, first of all, they noticed the dogs are going crazy around the area. They hear this high-pitched whining noise, and they hear these loud baby crying sounds. And everything's getting louder and noisier as they get closer to the pasture area. They angle their vehicle with the headlights on because it's dark, and they want to pass to see where they're going. And as they're walking up there, they realize it's really odd that looks like something's draining the power because the headlights are getting very dim, and they never saw that before. Anyhow, they get to the top of the hill, and they're just perplexed because they cannot believe what they're seeing. About 250 feet away, here's this large object that appears to be now on the ground or right directly above the ground. And it's not a complete sphere. It's like a hemisphere. It's a half of a circle, a big white dome, about 100 feet or more in diameter. It's huge, illuminating the whole area, making the sound, this high-pitched whining noise, and they can't believe what they're seeing. So they're sitting there studying this thing, but then all of a sudden their attention's drawn. There's a barbed wire fence through the field about 75 feet away. And that's when they notice these two tall, hair-covered creatures, one behind the other, slowly walking in their direction along the barbed wire fence. The one in front is about 8 feet tall. The one behind is a little shorter, around 7 feet tall. They're covered with long, dark, matted hair that's hanging all over the body. The arms are so long, they said almost were touching the ground. They're bipedal. They're walking upright. They have no neck. The eyes are large, about as big as a 50-cent piece, and they're luminous green. And there's this funny rubbery burning smell in the air. Well, the one young boy was so frightened, he just ran out of the field. And then the other one started yelling at the older fellow to shoot at him. So he takes his first shot, and it turned out to be a tracer. He fires the second shot, which is a second tracer. But what happens is the largest of the two creatures makes this loud baby crying, whining noise, reaches out with its one hand as though to reach the tracer. And the moment it does that, that huge luminous object in the field vanishes. It doesn't take off and rise off the ground. It physically disappears. So when it does, most of the luminosity is gone and the sound is stopped. And at that point, the creatures turn around, start walking back along the fence, back towards the woods. The fellow now has, using his live ammo and his 30-06, been hunting for years. He said to me, till he passed away years ago, he said, I'll never forget that. As I'm firing at those things, the largest creature's just staring at me with those glowing eyes, looking at me as I'm firing into it, my 30-06, and there's no effect on it whatsoever. So those two fellas hurried back to their vehicle. They went to the farmhouse, told the family what happened. They took them to a neighbor's and called the state police. When the trooper arrived about 45 minutes later, he said, "I'm here to investigate the incident." And the witness said, "Look, just forget about it. You're going to think I'm crazy." And he said, "Look, we had a report of two similar creatures on a mountain the night before. I have to investigate the reports." So they go up into the field in the troop car, and I interviewed the trooper, and he said when they got up there, they're looking for evidence, and he said the area where the object had been on the ground was self-luminescent and glowing, about 100 feet or more in diameter. He said he noticed the animals, the farm animals, wouldn't go near it. He said it seemed a little warmer when he stepped inside of it. He said he shined his flashlight beam in and could barely see it. And he told me, he said, if I had a newspaper, he said, I believe I could have sat down within that glowing area and read the newspaper from the glow coming off of it, which was up about a foot off the ground. There's more to the story. That's the main important part of the story. Other things happen during the night. It's a long story and gets very involved. But also, some of the other points is when they went back, I was told when they went back to the state police barracks, both the state trooper and the witness were separately taken to two separate rooms. They were separately interviewed about what happened. Then they called me to send my team up. And that was the case that really convinced my team and myself that we're dealing with something that's just far beyond anything we had ever anticipated before. There's a lot more to the Bigfoot phenomenon and the UFO phenomenon, and many other cases, some even stranger, occurred after that case occurred.
Right. Now, me and Ron and Colin have heard that case before, but Gina, that was the first time you've heard that. What's your reactions or thoughts before we, any other questions?
Sorry.
That's okay.
I mean, I'm trying to process most of it. That's a lot. I mean, and let me process it. I have to process a little bit on that.
Jump back in.
I was just going to say, that's amazing.
So let me ask you this, Stan. One of the interesting things I find is in your area, you've got enough integrity and respect that you've got the police calling you. I mean, it sounds like a X-Files on TV or something. The police can't handle it. Call Stan. Dum dum dum. So I'm sure you didn't like go to them and say, hey, here's $50. Give me a call or something. So I bet a lot of people would say, well, that's interesting, if nothing else, that the police call you. What's your relationship been like that? And when did it start that they were calling you?
That surprisingly started back, I believe it was about 1970. Well, actually, I was getting some reports prior to that, but when my group was well organized in the 70s is when I was surprised at all these cases were coming in and being referred from different agencies across the state. And I had no idea that they took that upon themselves to do that. But I know I had some reports, I think probably as early as probably the late 1969, or late 60s rather. I know I had gotten some reports, but it was mainly after my organization was set up in 1970, and it was probably around 73 when things really began to open up.
And so you've got the cops going, yeah, we don't know what this case is, because I'm sure they're not calling you for like the homicide down by the boardwalk. So, I mean, to me, that lends some validity to some of these, is that the cops believe the people with the reports enough to say, we've got another guy to handle this.
Of course, that's not they're not involved in these cases. They have a lot more things to handle all the time. And, but of course, when the public calls and they were frightened by something, if something happened they couldn't explain or understand, who do you call? Well, especially back in those days, you called the police departments. And so that wasn't that unusual. But also, you got to realize, of the multitudes of witnesses I've interviewed of all these phenomena, whether it be a UFO or a Bigfoot or some other phenomena, so many of these people, and I still deal with these people every day. I mean, I deal with some people today who are extremely credible backgrounds. And over the years, they come from all walks of life, men, women, children of all age groups. But, geez, I've interviewed school teachers and scientists and police officers, a lot of police officers who have seen a lot of strange things over the years, commercial pilots and corporate pilots, private pilots, air traffic controllers, I mean, all kind of credible people. And I can tell you, 99% of them want no publicity whatsoever. That's one of the first things they often say to me. They said, I'm reluctant to even call or talk to anybody. I just want to know if anybody's ever reported anything like this. Have you had any more calls? But just don't use my name.
Colin, you said you had some stuff.
Yeah, about back to the 73 case, the Bigfoot UFO one. The glowing green spot. Did any of the officers or any of the witnesses who were actually there ever report any type of like, did they ever contract any type of cancer afterwards? Because it emitting some heat sounds almost to me like some sort of radiation. Did you guys have like Geiger counters to take any readings or anything, or was that anything that was thought about?
Yes, we did. We had radiation equipment. In fact, one of the people with me was a Westmoreland County radiation defense officer. He was in my group. And so we had radiation equipment, and everything was normal background radiation when we got there.
Huh. Okay, that's
So
weird.
So what do you think the continuing luminescence could be or was?
Well, it had vanished quickly. So, I mean, it was there, but by the time we got there, it was no longer luminous. And there was only one trooper there, so he only saw it with the other witness. But that was it. When we got there, the animals still would not go in the area, but there was no radiation levels.
Yeah, getting back to what Colin said, that was a very good point about, because you would assume that if it was something that was putting out energy, it would have to be radioactive in nature. But now that you have said about it, appearing the way it did and then disappearing, you wonder now if it might have been some sort of bioluminescence.
Well, and again, we don't know. And about all this other light phenomena that's showing up more and more, the balls of light, the spheres of light. And, again, and I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier, I've been doing so many interviews, I can't remember, that these small spheres of light that I've talked about going back to the 60s, and it's going on more and more. I talked to another person today that told me just out of the blue, he said, have you ever heard of people seeing small balls of light? And, of course, I was very familiar with it. And but they come very close to people. I've had cases where they've entered people's homes and cars through open windows, and sometimes they go right out through the windows or right through the walls of homes or vehicles. And I had one case years and years ago up in northern PA where a lady told me she was in her kitchen one morning cooking, and the window was open, and one of these small spheres floated into the kitchen. And she's watching this thing floating around. And what's her reaction? She grabs a broom and strikes it and said it broke into two identical little spheres. They floated around and went back out the window.
And you mentioned the UFO connection, and you were the first person I heard that from. And again, this isn't a theory you just, hey, I'll come up because it sounds good. It was because what you said, you took the reports of Bigfoots, but you also took reports of UFOs, and you started noticing, hey, over here in the corner of the county, they saw a UFO, and then 2 days later saw a Bigfoot. And then in the next county, a week later, they saw a UFO, and then they saw a Bigfoot. So you made the connection between this and kind of forwarded that as an idea of maybe there's some more connection than what we would think immediately.
Yeah, and I mean, it wasn't something that we were looking for. And we were very careful. We interviewed witnesses. We had some really good trained people in the field who work with people. We had people in the medical field. We had police officers. So we knew not to use leading questions. We wanted people to tell us themselves in their own words what they're experiencing. And so many of them were coming up with the same kind of details, little details that were so intriguing. And during that wave in 73 out in Derry Township along the Chestnut Ridge, which continues to be a hotbed for phenomena, and there's other places as well in the state and other areas around the country now where this is going on. But during that big wave in 73, and I go into great detail about this in my Silent Invasion book because there's just way too much to discuss and talk about, there were two farms. And the people at that time were saying that whatever this thing is, it keeps periodically coming back to our property. And various people on the farm and people who visited were experiencing these things as well. And we tried to stake it out when we could, but we had so many cases going on, we couldn't stay all the time. And I remember one witness said, and they had seen this thing, they hear it scream at times. I mean, in one case, it was standing like eight foot away from one of the people who lived in the house. And the one witness said to me, just questioned me and mentioned, she said, I don't know if it had anything to do with this or not, but she said, we noticed this thing, like it's like a glowing, almost, I think it was like a glowing flare. But she said, we'd hear the thing scream or we'd see it, and a short time later, you'd see this strange light glowing, moving across the sky, lighting up the ground below. And that's the kind of thing that kept coming up. And it was just so fascinating to be out there night after night and day after day interviewing all these people and hearing all similar stories. And again, these weren't just coming from one area. We were getting some reports from miles and miles away in other parts of the state. And then 73, I mean, while we had this biggest outbreak in Pennsylvania, you know, the United States experienced a massive UFO wave that peaked in the fall of 73 that made a lot of national news. But there was more than normal Bigfoot activity going on in 73 in other states as well, but not to the degree it was going on here. But some states, and a lot of people didn't know about it. There were some states, for example, I believe Illinois, Tennessee, that were having these very strange incidents ongoing, just like I was having in Pennsylvania.
So you mentioned in that case that there were two Bigfoot-like creatures, two big hairy creatures, but they disappeared. And then you also mentioned this other report, these people that were getting this creature harassing them over time. So the people from the 73 case, did they have any other sightings or reports of any of those two Bigfoot creatures in the area after this?
Well, first of all, on that particular case, the creatures did not disappear. They turned around, started walking back along the fence line into the woods, and the guys took off running. So they didn't. They apparently they think they went into the woods. They did not disappear. But we had a much more intriguing case, and it was the case of even beyond that case we just discussed. This was happened several miles away in February of 74. Way up in the mountains near Ohiopyle. And this was the case that convinced me we're dealing with something more than a flesh and blood animal. And I'll be glad to tell you the story if you're not familiar with it.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
All right, so this is February 6, 1974. And all this activity is still going on. And some of the people that are probably listening to your podcast, they'll probably remember the time period. This was during a big national trucker strike. There was gas rationing in the country, so a lot of people remember that. There was a lot of violence across the country. So at that time, the National Guard and the state police were patrolling together and responding to incidents together, and members of both teams responded to this case. I was not able to get gas that night. I couldn't get up to the scene till early the next morning. But what I found out was here's a woman that lived all her life deep in the mountains, had this nice little cabin home at the time, and she was sitting there normal that night watching TV when on her little porch she hears a noise. She had some empty pop cans out there, and something was knocking the pop cans around. Well, she was thinking, you know, a few weeks before we had this small pack of wild dogs come through, and I bet you those dogs are back doing that. So she thought, you know what, I'll just grab my shotgun and I'll fire over their head and scare those dogs away. So what she does, she goes over and grabs a double-barrel shotgun, loads one chamber, walks over to the front door, flicks on the light, steps out and flicks on the light, and as she steps out, there's no dog, but only a few feet in front of her is this huge, hairy creature, at least 7 foot tall. Then as soon as she put the porch light on, it puts its arm straight up over its head. What does she do? She fires right into it. She said there's this brilliant, bright flash of light, like the flash on a camera, and it physically vanishes and disappears right in front of her. So her in-laws lived 100 feet away, and they heard the gunshot, and they called her and said, what are you shooting at? She explained it to him. Her son-in-law grabs his sidearm, starts walking down that dark road towards the cabin. He sees a dark figure running down the road. As he gets closer, he said he's surrounded by 4 or 5 hairy people with eyes like coals of fire, starts shooting at him randomly, runs into the cabin, Short time later, they see this large object like a big Christmas ornament hovering over the woods at the same time. That's when they called the state police. So I talked to the primary investigator, and he said by the time they found the location, he said everything was back to normal. Well, but not really normal. He said something very strange happened there. That was based on the animal reactions. And that's something that's been reported many times, and something I have seen during that time period, where the animals react very strangely, even the most vicious dogs, when they're close to these Bigfoot creatures. That's very common. They've also reacted that way with low-level UFO sightings, too. But anyhow, the officer told me when he got on the scene, these people had several big dogs, plus other farm animals. The animals are all scared, I was told. There was cats in the house that were hiding, acting very odd. They had a very young child, a very young baby in the house, and he said that night and never before since had that baby cried and was so upset during all this that was going on outside, and these big dogs wouldn't bark or move or make a sound. The trooper told me, so when they got up there, these dogs wouldn't move. I think one of them, he said, was an Eskimo Spitz or German Shepherd. One of them was in a cage, and he opened up the cage, and that dog should have ripped his arm off, and it wouldn't even move or make a sound. Now, when I got up there early the next morning with my team, the dogs all welcome us. They're all barking very, very loud. And we found, we're searching the woods around the house, and we found right in line from the porch where she fired at it, we found that BB pattern in the tree where she had shot at it. That was the case, among others, and other similar ones were later reported, and many have been reported around the country somewhat similar, where these things just physically vanished and disappeared into a flash of light.
Which is what the 73 case kind of had, but it was a big flash of light, not the creatures that disappeared.
Well, it was a big object. Yeah, it was a very large, 100-foot diameter, huge object that was apparently on the ground.
Ron, did you have something?
No. I never, felt to be fascinated by these stories, even though I've heard them many times and I've read about them in Stan's books. It's one of those things where, what else can you call it but high strangeness? I mean, what else is going on there? The idea of things disappearing and reappearing. This is something that does not make any sense into our physics. This is something beyond our understanding. But it's being reported now more and more. And not only is it being reported more and more just among Bigfoot researchers, but you can go into extension now where this is now becoming more commonplace on the reality TV shows as well, too. Whenever people are out there looking for Bigfoot or out there looking for UFOs, they're starting to adopt it a little bit more and more, that there's more out there than meets the eye. There's this gray area where things just don't make sense. And I'm a little excited to see it happen, but I'm also a little irritated by it as well too, because I think whenever you start muddying the waters, then the people who are just casual viewers may start thinking they're seeing something that's actually not there. When Stan was putting this stuff together, none of this stuff was being reported. Like he said, this is before the internet. This stuff was very rarely reported on television, at least the idea of these things disappearing and reappearing. So whenever Stan was taking that, these were, the first accounts of this happening. And now it's becoming more prevalent. And once it saturates our cultural understanding, becomes part of our vernacular, at that point, I think that it starts, as I said, muddying the waters. And now people, I think, are going to report this more and more, even though they might not be experiencing what they're saying is going on.
Right.
Well, the only thing I can tell you is this: there's a lot more that's going on than the public knows about, and there's a lot of little details a lot of people don't know. That a lot of these people are recurring with the same details and same information, and indications are it's just increasing around the country, which is one reason why they're talking more about it, because a lot of the people in the Bigfoot UFO field for years and years didn't want to talk about these things. Well, now it's getting to the point where it's a much more common phenomena, and people can't just sweep it under the rug, and more people are talking about it now. And I guess there's something that, as strange as it is, and it's very strange, I said years ago, the phenomenon is so strange it protects itself, and I think it's far beyond our present scientific understanding right now to figure out what we're dealing with.
And with that, you were talking about the footprints. Now, I know I've heard the other people say, and you've said on several cases, you're following footprints, and sometimes it's in snow or mud, and then the footprints just stop in the middle of nowhere. Like, but you always get those people that say, oh, well, it jumped and you just didn't see the footprint, or it climbed a tree or something like that. And what's your response to that type of allegation, Stan?
We saw it many times, and let me tell you, I had professional people in the group. I had forensic people in the group. I had experts who knew about tracks, and there's no way under the circumstances or ground conditions, and with the great width between the tracks and the depth in the ground of the snow or in the mud or whatever, it could have been fabricated. Impossible. And you get these reports again from widespread areas. I've got pictures. I've got great video people sent me just in the last couple of years. One family here in Westmoreland County, they woke early one morning in heavy snow, look in their backyard, and here's these huge 16-inch tracks with big stride between them, and they go the whole way across their backyard. They get to the kids' playground, and they suddenly stop, and they're gone.
And that's where you started, some of the theories started coming about with the interdimensional, the connections with the UFOs, things like that. And you say you've still got cases like that coming in that can't be quite explained just by a creature running away.
Oh yeah, and even this year, and many in the last few years, and it's so complex. And when you talk to the witnesses, and again, a lot of this information is not very well known out there. And I began to find a lot of patterns over the years that connects. It goes deeper and deeper. For example, when we talk about, I'll give you an example. We talk about the out of place animals like black panthers, which of course, black panthers, we would know would be black leopard, black jaguar, a melanistic version of them that you've seen in the zoo, but they aren't supposed to be roaming around in the woods of Pennsylvania. But people see them year after year. We had 3 very good, very close range black panther encounters here in western PA last year. And some of these are occurring. One was right along the base of the Chestnut Ridge up in Derry Township, which again is a hotbed for, you name it, we have it up there, from paranormal phenomena, Bigfoot sightings, UFOs, Thunderbird sightings, all kind of cryptid stuff for years and years and years. And I noticed patterns years ago. For example, sometimes when you have an outbreak of Bigfoot sightings in a certain area, or this other phenomenon that's going on, you have other things showing up, including black panther sightings. And also, many people have never heard this, but over the years across the country as well, sometimes the Bigfoot is accompanied by another cryptid. So there's more than one creature seen together at the same time and place. And once again, understand what I'm saying. I am not suggesting that Bigfoot is a passenger or pilot in a spacecraft from another planet. I'm not suggesting they're even extraterrestrial, because we sure don't even know for sure what the UFO phenomenon is. These things suddenly appear out of nowhere sometimes. They can look physically solid. They can physically change form. They can appear and disappear. And there's more to this than I think anybody understands.
Yeah, and the more I've heard, I agree. And Ron, it sounds like the Bigfoots are witches that have familiars.
Well, that's a part of the high strangeness. But getting back to the tracks, as just somebody that's out in the field, I've had to rely on Stan numerous times. And a few years ago, during the snowfall, right in front of my house, these tracks that he had talked about did appear in my house as well too. There was no beginning, there was no end. It looked like something simply stepped out of
midair,
something, one reality into another reality. And it started off with the right track. So it was a right track, then a left track, as if it was building up momentum to becoming physical. And the trackway was probably no more than maybe 35 yards. Nothing, it wasn't spectacularly long or anything like that. But it was a very small footprint. It was probably less than the size of $1, as a matter of fact. And these prints can actually be seen on Stan's website. But what's so unique about this is that in the summertime, I went back to that same area and I was out hiking with my family, and we encountered these same size tracks again in a medium of mud this time, because it was springtime. So that was 2 different times I've encountered these tracks within probably a 50-yard radius of each other. So very, very close. So I recently went back to that location within the last couple of months. And what is so interesting is that location now has been bought up by somebody, and there's no trespassing signs all over the place. So whatever happened, whatever transpired there, I'm not going to be able to poke around there very much. But yeah, getting back to the idea of tracks and the idea of high strangeness, and these don't have to be large tracks either. Stan informed me that the tracks that I was seeing was something that has been reported over the last few decades in my area as well. So these Littlefoot tracks are also prevalent in this area as well.
And let me add to the mystery with the footprints. We've all seen your typical five-toed Bigfoot tracks from Pennsylvania and all around the country, the very typical tracks. But as you recall, during the massive wave in '73, if you look at my book, you'll see a picture. One of the first cases I got involved in really was kind of the beginning to a lot of this, where things really started from there, was a case that occurred, let me think, July 31st, 1973. I got a call from a family member that said something very strange happened to another relative on that evening, and he was just getting out of the hospital, and I went out to interview him that day, so that would have been August 7th of '73. The house is now gone. It was a large wooded area at the time, not far from what was in the Green Gate Mall outside of Greensburg. It was a very warm night. He was in there shaving early because he always got up early for work, and he's shaving as normal. He had the window up in the bathroom, but the screen was in, and he began to smell this funny rotten odor. He said it smelled something like rotten cucumber, and he said, I happened to turn around, look in the window, here are these two huge glowing red eyes staring at him. The window's 8 feet off the ground. There's several big dogs out there. The dogs wouldn't bark or make a sound, which they thought was very odd because the dogs bark at everybody. He ran into the house and yelled, and some of the other people came out, and they smelled the odor. Whatever there was gone. I was able to interview him when he got out of the hospital. He went to the hospital the next day after this. Apparently, he was very shook up over the incident, and found out that several weeks before, a group of young boys was going to take a shortcut over to the mall through the local woods, and they heard this noise in the woods, and they figured it was a deer, so they started throwing some rocks in, and instead of a deer, here comes this very tall, hair-covered creature walking up behind the house. So I got to interview some of those boys, and I got permission to look around the property, and some of the kids followed me up, and we're walking around up there for quite a while, and I remember the ground conditions up there was not that great, not too good for tracks, and I was about ready to leave when I happened to look down. As I recall, there was a partial footprint, and there was one complete track of the weirdest looking footprint I had ever seen. And I remember the boys came over and said, what kind of animal can make a footprint like that? It was 13 inches long, 8 inches wide, and clearly three-toed. And you could just see the depth of those toes into the ground. So I got on the radio, and one of my associates came out, and we took photographs and measurements and made a cast. And while we were there, we get a radio report that one of our researchers from north of Pittsburgh that morning was investigating an incident where something 9 feet tall was looking in a window, and the police found large footprints up there. So that was the beginning of this major wave. So the point is this. Not only do you have five-toed tracks, you got three-toed tracks. And throughout the country, and a lot of people don't talk about it, but it's out there. In many parts of the country, we have a long history of Bigfoot sightings and five-toed tracks. You also have three-toed tracks showing up. Sometimes you have four-toed tracks showing up. But I can tell you here in Pennsylvania, there's a whole menagerie of other footprints that we've made cast of. These were credible witnesses. There was no indication of hoaxes. And yeah, we've had hoaxes over the years, very, very few, but you could easily tell the difference in the footprints and in the path of the tracks from the weight distribution, the way the toes spread, different things. There were certain details you could tell the difference. They were not hoaxes. So the point is this. You've got numerous types of footprints, some of which are very, very even stranger than the five-toed and the three-toed tracks that are showing up. There's no explanation for some of these things. You cannot possibly have so many type of unknown creatures out there, yet you've got so many credible people who are reporting so many strange things, you can't eliminate the reports. So there's got to be something else involved here which we don't understand, and the only thing that makes any sense is that we're dealing with something that, for a lack of a better term, comes in and out of our physical reality. They're here at times, there's times they leave evidence, and they're gone. They come and they go.
And that's what I love about talking with you and looking at all your research, because it spans decades. It's a huge amount of research. And like Ron said, it's everything. So these connections can be made, and things that may not be seen by somebody that just ignores it. And that's been a topic that we've had come up lately. Uh, well, Stan, I don't want to take up all your time. Anybody else have anything before Stan gets out of here?
It's always a pleasure to have Stan on our shows, though, because it really ups our street cred, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Absolutely.
He's a bit of aristocracy in this world, so it's good to have him. You know, we have to clean up a little bit and invite the company over. So yeah, I like him on.
And I appreciate Stan. I mean, if no other reason for us personally, he really kickstarted Colin getting into this. We happened to run into him at something, and Colin just about lost his mind. And Stan was great talking to him, because Colin was like 14 or 15 at the time. You know, a lot of people in this field ignore the kids. So Stan, you know, we definitely appreciate you for that, because it's been something Colin's been doing for years now.
Dan's the reason I'm involved.
And I appreciate it so much. And, you know, Colin, I could just tell from his knowledge and his professionalism. And, I mean, Colin has done reports that most people have never seen, which you need to get out there. I mean, on a lot of these different anomalies and phenomena, I mean, these are extremely detailed reports that are a lot better than some of the experts in the field did over the years. And he has a lot to add to this field, and I'm glad to see he's back into it.
Yes, absolutely agree. All right. Well, Stan, appreciate you taking the time, calling in and talking to us today for the podcast, our new fledgling little podcast. We'll have to follow up with you, and hopefully we could see you live at some event coming up.
Well, I sure hope that things are beginning to improve around here with the virus situation. It's been pretty rough. Most of our big events have been canceled even for this year, but hopefully I'll be able to get out soon. Hopefully we'll have some good events, and hopefully we'll get to see each other again. And I want to let your listeners know they can go to my website for updates. There's a lot of interesting information on there. It's stangordon.info. They can email me at paufo@comcast.net. Phone number and contact information is on the website. And my books are available on Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com as well.
Nice. And I will definitely link to your website. And we will probably go back there for research, because part of what our mission is to take any investigation and delve into it through previous research, through legend and lore and mythology, through our own investigations. You know, we're really trying to approach things from every angle. So I'm sure your vast resource will be very helpful at times in that area. So it's very appreciated.
Okay, and check out that recent report I just put on. There's a lot of really interesting historical UFO cases I investigated, which I mentioned in that report that a lot of people, I'm sure, have never heard about before.
Yeah, definitely. We'll take a look at that. And we may ask you, if you got some free time, come back on sometime. We'll see what new stuff is happening.
Oh, I'll be glad to come back on, and just let me know ahead of time. And there's always new information coming in. I'm dealing with a lot of cases just coming in from the last few weeks, and I'm getting a lot of old reports, and it's a very busy time.
Great. All right, Stan, thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, for everybody, good talking to you again. We'll all talk again soon, hopefully.
Hopefully.
Have a good one, Stan.
Good night.
Good night. So Stan did bring up something I wanted to mention before we cut off here tonight. Ron, you've been on a few other podcasts with some people and doing some videos and stuff. What's going on in that realm with you? What's happening that you can share?
Well, the one guy that he's from Georgia, he used to be an ex-wrestler, and he found my name and he said, I would like you to show me some hotspots. So I took him out to show him some hotspots. And then about a week later, he informed me, said, hey, Ron, I bought a Bigfoot costume. Do you want to go out in the woods and take some pictures? I said, dude, I said, no. I said, this area is far too small for this. I understand he's trying to make a buck and everything like that, but he wants to go out and downright fake things. So now I'm in the process of separating myself from him, because he came out as just somebody that was very legitimate And now his professional wrestling background is coming into play. And the only other thing that I did before was I did something called Legit Paranormal.
Yes.
Subsidiary of Legit Sports Betting. Did you know this?
Really?
Yeah. So it's these 4 guys that get together, or 3 guys that get together. They talk sports, but like once a month they talk about the paranormal. So that's what happened with that. But yeah, the other stuff though, there's a lot of charlatans out there, and I was surprised. I met him twice. He seemed like a good guy until the whole costume thing came up, which were nuts.
I was on a wrestling podcast to talk about cryptids. I found a lot of wrestling people are really into this stuff for whatever reason.
That's and that's what we've said from day one, even right from our sizzle reel. We want to value our integrity utmost.
Yes.
And
yes.
Colin and I have structures up in the woods that we're probably going to talk about on a future episode that they're very convincing. It's very, it does not look normal. I mean, I've been in woods most of my life. I've been in these woods pretty much all my life. And this is just not a natural trees falling. Right. And we've got pictures and video, but we're not saying, well, we got a Bigfoot living in the woods.
All I feel comfortable saying at this moment is that, to my granted limited knowledge of the natural world, I am not sure what caused those.
Yeah. Nice.
And Colin, it's been mentioned, you're back into it. So what have you got going on now?
Yeah, so I have a live podcast, live radio show on the Paranormal King Radio Network. I'm bringing back my Crypto Kid radio show. I missed doing it. Yeah. I've missed doing it for years. So,
once you get past that first annoying guest, probably.
Yeah, I'm having this guy on called Ron Murphy. He just kind of messaged me and begged until I gave in. And I don't know how it's gonna go, but I guess I can always just hang up if it goes bad.
Right.
So
that'll be exciting.
By the time this episode airs, I'm pretty sure that I'll have 3 or 4 in the can.
Yeah,
but,
just grin and bear it.
But you can find it live at paranormalking.com or on mixcloud.com/crypto_kid. That'll be where I'm posting my archives to listen to after it has aired.
Well, it's slip me $10 and I'll put a link on the show notes.
I want to let you know too, guys, I have to go film a real quick. Well, not film. My daughter's going to use her camera because it's better on her phone than mine. I have to do something for Hillview Manor, but there's something up at Hillview Manor called HillCon, which I'd like us all to be able to go to. We can set up a table there. We can, sell our merch or whatever the case may be. But I think that's coming up in August, but that's something I want to talk to you guys about.
Okay. Yep. Definitely.
Send me the day. I am doing something on a Saturday in August, and we're actually closing the shop because I'm busy. So I don't know about the leniency with Adam then, because I'm also leaving for Mothman in September.
Right,
but I'll talk to him. I'll talk to him.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk it. Yeah, we'll definitely talk about it, guys.
And just as a preview for everybody still listening, we hope to have like a beginner's guide, field guide to investigations and research, which we got to talk more about, and we should get here soon. So, all right, folks. I love talking to Stan. It was a good episode.
Can't wait, guys. I can't wait to see you guys in person again.
Yeah. Got to get our personal life back under control.
That's right.
Yep.
All right. Well, everybody, that's a wrap.
All right.
Good night.